You're awesome.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. Chelsea is under the weather, so she will join us via Zoom. So I'm going to call the select board meeting to order at 7:03 on November 21st, 2022. Okay, I'm going to start off with saying we're not going to have public comment tonight, either the normal front and end of meeting, nor during the meeting. We're going to be in the weeds with talking tense. We're going to not take public comment tonight. Okay, so we're going to start with our consent agenda. So we've got A, B, C, and D. Anyone want to hold any of those four? No. I want to hold A. Everybody okay with B, C, and D? Yep. All right, so motion to approve consent agenda items B, C, and D.
Second.
All in favor? Okay.
Roll call
is Chelsea.
Sorry, Chelsea, and you're going to have to keep reminding me of that. Okay, so roll call vote because we got Chelsea on Zoom. Is she there?
Yes.
Okay.
I
Chelsea.
Aye.
Sorry, Andrew.
Aye.
Sam.
Aye.
Lisa. Aye. Cook is aye. So 5-0 to approve items B, C, and D. Okay, A, just very quickly. So we have the tree contract to basically take down the roughly 100 trees that were approved a couple months ago. So it's ready to go. So I just wanted to reiterate the finances here. So that's all I wanted to hold this for. So we approved $152,000 between town meeting, special town meeting, and our most recent ARPA vote. Karen is telling us in this memo that it's going to be $110,000. So it's going to be $42,000 less than what we approved. So the $100,000 has already come out of overlays there. So we've got an extra $42,000 sitting in our ARPA designated funds that we can deal with on December 6th. Either we're going to keep it there or we'll move it. Okay, everybody okay with that? Yeah. Okay, that's all I wanted to hold it for. Okay, so motion to approve the tree contract to remove the 100 or so trees.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Chelsea?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Sam?
Aye.
Lisa? Aye. Cook is aye, so 5-0. So good, that is progress. Okay. Susan, can you come on up? This is Susan Hamlin, who has applied to be on the ad hoc Community Center Exploration Committee, Exploratory Committee. So thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
So welcome. So can you just tell everybody, something about you, what you want us to know, why you want to do this?
Sure. So I've lived in Southborough for 14 years. This past Halloween, we moved in. My son is a 5th grader at Neary right now. And I bumped into Sam and Kathy at the transfer station a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned this particular committee. My husband and I went over and said hello, as we often do. And it sounded like an interesting way for me to get more involved in the town. I work at the Museum of Science in Boston. And what else? I have my PhD in molecular biology from UMass in Worcester, from the med school there. And so I've lived in Massachusetts now longer than I lived in New Jersey beforehand. So I'm practically a real Massachusetts person now. What else? At the museum, I do a lot of live presentations, but I've since shifted into community programming. And so I've done a lot of work in working with the community of the entire Boston and Metro West area, linking groups together in order to try and get things done.
So do you use your degree much with what you do?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So I was the primary content developer on a vaccine exhibit at the museum this past year. And so that definitely I used my degree for, but otherwise I basically use the skills that I gained from getting my PhD and not necessarily the content knowledge from it for my job. So, and connecting with scientists, it helps a lot of times if they can see me as one of their own when I'm working with them. But I'm working with not just scientists now, but the whole range of community partners at the museum.
Okay, so that's great. Do you mind if I let Brooke know who your husband is?
Sure, I can.
I just wanna make sure.
Yeah, no, that's fine. My husband, many of you may know him, is Dustin Heilman, and he was the one who drafted the dark sky bill,
Mhm.
which passed. I think it was during COVID. It was
Oh,
like
was that
103-degree May day when that passed, when we were outside.
That was a
But,
second,
yeah.
because that was 21, so yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I had just had my first COVID vaccine. I wasn't feeling well that day, but we still went and we did the vote, and it was really exciting that it passed. And he's actually since worked with a few other towns in order to help them draft dark sky bills as
That's
well.
wonderful.
Lisa?
Just want to say thank you for stepping forward. I really don't have a lot of questions to you. I think you're going to be a tremendous asset to this committee. And again, thank you for stepping forward.
You're welcome.
Sam?
As Susan mentioned, had a chance to chat at transfer station, and so I had some of my questions answered there. And again, I think your museum experience with the community programs is actually a great base here for this critical project. A lot of variables in this process, and again, I think your analytical background is very helpful with that as well. So it's a great committee, and I think it would be a great addition to it. So thank you for volunteering.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Hi, so this is kind of an interesting committee because I think of it as very kind of conceptual, the town is really nowhere even near close to building a community center, but what drew you in particular to this particular committee, and what are some of the things like in a best case scenario you could see part of a Southborough Community Center, and what are your thoughts on that?
So I guess one of the things that's really interesting is, so I live right near the Arts Center, or the Southborough Art Center, Rec Center area there, and we've been watching it kind of fall a bit into more disarray there, except for the playground, which is awesome. And we're walking distance there, so we've been there a lot. And so just in seeing how there's I guess such a wide variety of different spaces that a community center I think would really bring together. Having the senior center and the community center, having the rec center, having all of these places. And I think it would be really nice to have kind of like the place for people to go to be able to hold a vaccine clinic and all those. And so I think there's a lot of those places around town, and it would be really amazing to be able to see one big center that's in there. And I'm curious as well to see how it would actually come together with all the different possibilities of existing buildings or new buildings that might come up.
Thank you.
So Susan, you're number 6 out of 7, so the committee's almost filled. It's got a quorum, so my guess is they will start meeting sooner rather than later, maybe first of the year. I think we'll wait till after the holidays, but you've got some really good people on this committee with you. You'll enjoy working with the people on there. Okay, everybody, listen to what I'm going to say. I'm going to get it right tonight. Okay. Okay.
Chelsea, have any questions?
Oh, sorry, Chelsea.
That's okay. Hi, Susan. Sorry I can't be there to see you in person, but I think we've met remotely before on a focus group. Is that right?
Yes, I knew your name
Okay.
sounded familiar. Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
well, thank you for stepping forward. Can you just reiterate what school your son is at?
Oh, he's at Neary.
Okay,
He's
so
in
you've gone through some of the transitions from schools already.
Yes, although he was at Woodward only for like 5 months because then we
Okay,
went to
'cause of
Vogue for a
COVID.
year and a half. But yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for stepping forward. I look forward to your work on this committee.
Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to make a motion to appoint Susan to the Community Center Exploratory Committee with the term to expire 6/30/23.
Second.
Okay. Roll call vote. Chelsea,
Aye.
Andrew,
Aye.
Sam,
Aye.
Lisa.
Aye.
Cook is aye. 5-0. Welcome. And
Congratulations.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for
tonight,
coming.
Thank you so much.
too. Thank you.
Remember, we have to get sworn in.
Yeah, you go to the
Town
town, townhouse and ask for the town, go to the town
Yeah.
clerk's.
You'll be
desk.
getting a letter,
Okay.
an appointment
Oh,
letter.
great.
We'll send you an email, and then you can take that letter and go to the town clerk's office in the townhouse, and they'll swear you in.
Wow, that's kind of exciting. That's more exciting than I even thought.
And pass the 20-page multiple choice test.
Yes. I'll
I bet she could. Okay, We'll move right along. Okay, Mr. Butler. Come on up.
We have item B.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I am tabling B for this meeting. Today, Mr. Boland did send out an email to the members of the PWPB that was an attempt to start trying to organize a meeting, right? So we'll hold on this letter, okay, and see how it goes.
That's up to the chair.
If you wanted to put the bullets or whatever you wanted to. Just get going. Let's go.
Karen's gonna be here at 7:30, so she'll join. Okay.
Fine.
All right. Okay, so to tee this one up, last time that we formally talked about this, we basically decided that we wanted to take the next step forward to see if we could work out a deal with Hopkinton to allow them to connect through Southborough as far as the water system goes because of the issues they have. So that's where we are tonight. So we're going to ask John to lead us through the work that he has done, including proposed terms of a letter of intent. Okay. So this is for us to truly well proceed tonight and see what we can accomplish tonight as far as going forward. Okay.
Do we have an ability to put slides up here?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, then, the answer to your questions. So as you'll see, the first part, and perhaps you've had a chance to review this, but the first part of what I wanted to review with you was that the other action item from the September 20th meeting was to see if we could get in touch with some other, more contact with some of the other communities that might have some experience with these kinds of supply relationships. And in fact, with a certain amount of pushing, we did get a couple things going. So go to the next slide. So this is an update on that, and then we'll get into the LOI. It shouldn't take too long. So the first part is a review of the Lexington Bedford MWRA supply arrangement, and then we get into the LOI discussion. So next slide. So we interviewed management personnel at MWRA. Is it the consulting group? Is that what it? No. What's the name of the group that Joe Favolaro?
Advisory board.
Advisory board.
Executive
And
committee.
so I interviewed Joe Favolaro, who is the chair of the advisory board or the staff, executive director. And then he put me in touch with the Lexington people and sent us a copy of their contract, of the old contract. And then Lexington people were a little bit hard for both Karen and I to get any time with, but we did make some contact. The Bedford Public Works Director, however, superintendent was, however, very cooperative, and we got good information there. As a result, we obtained both the original contract signed in 1993 as well as the 2018 one that followed the expiration of the original contract. Now, the new one had a lot of minor changes, but nothing big. Let's go ahead. So the basic situation is that Lexington supplies Bedford with all of its water. Bedford paid $7 million, a little over, to MWRA as an access fee in 1993. A type of fee that is currently in suspension if Hopkinton should get their application in and do it in time. They might not have to pay anything. Originally, the deal was only for supplementation of the Bedford well water. But sometime in the past, the Bedford well usage became contaminated. Bedford wells became contaminated primarily with PFAs, same problem as Hopkinton. And the relationship became one of supplying all the water. These two communities are quite a bit larger in total population than the combined Southborough Hopkinton. As you see, the thing you might expect, which is unusual in our case, is that the larger town, in this case, is supplying to the smaller town. In this case, in our situation, it'd be the reverse of that. Go ahead. Next slide. Okay, the original contract, apparently Lexington there's no evidence that Lexington needed to expand their system to supply the water to Bedford. I say no evidence, it happened 35 years ago or so the people who are in place now are people who were there then. It's unclear, but there's nothing in the contract, the old contract, that says, hey, we need to do this work to get you in. It appears not. But the connection still needed to be built, and the method of doing it in the old contract was Bedford paid for and supervised the construction inside Lexington to make the connections. And that's essentially what we're looking at as a possibility here. That is that the work that it could be, we could work out that Hopkinton pays for work that goes on inside the town of Southborough. And the contract in the Lexington Bedford says each side owns what's in their own town and maintains it. But originally, the construction inside Lexington was done by Bedford. The 2018 contract does have a clause that says, gee, we might need to expand to meet your needs. And here's how we're going to divvy up the costs in that case, but hasn't happened. So it's not very specific, the clause. Yeah, it doesn't even say here's how, it just says we'll agree on how to. So it hasn't happened in any case. Next, how do they charge for water? So it's contemplated here and now, both with respect to Ashland and Hopkinton, that MWRA will bill the consumer towns, Ashland and Hopkinton, directly for the MWRA fees. It's the opposite here in Lexington, Bedford, probably because it happened a long time ago. And in any case, so it still is the case that MWRA bills Lexington for all the use of both towns. Not a big deal, but just something that's notable. Lexington's fees consist of a base, what they call now a base charge. It was called a connection charge. Now it's called a base charge. Annually, $63,735 in 2018, subject to an inflationary adjuster. It's probably 70,000 or something like that now. Plus, they charge 1% above the MWRA rate for water used by Bedford. My rough guess is it's about $13,000 a quarter, dollars per quarter of the rider above what they're charging for the MWRA as a pass-through. So they're charging $100-some thousand a year for the on top of the MWRA water price. Now, you might say, well, how'd they come up with those numbers? Well, no one knows. It's not an encouraging answer for us. And they have a very specific number. The 1993 number is like 42,000 and some cents. I kid you not. No one knows where the number came from. It inflated up with they have an inflation index named in the contract, which makes it go up every year. It was 63,000 in 2018. If I talk to the guy at Bedford, why is it that number? We just agreed on it. It was in the old contract. Okay, fine. So as far as I can see, we don't know anything about how these numbers relate to anybody's costs. However, they don't argue with one another. So that's kind of like, that's the happiest thing, the whole story, right? Is that no one seems to be arguing. Okay, what are the good things and the bad things about this? Well, it's extremely simple. We're going to charge you this price, and nobody needs to measure anything. Great. But on the other hand, there was actually Lexington guy told me, well, it actually goes back before 93, but it wasn't a contract, and I don't know, whatever. So in any case, it goes back to ancient history. No one really knows. If you want to put a deal together now, it may be harder to agree. We'll just make up a price and charge you. So the other thing is that nobody knows either side is making money or losing money on this. There's no way to know because no one's measuring any costs. The intermunicipal agreement statute, if you read it, thinks that the towns involved in one of these service trade deals are going to charge based on cost. It refers to cost. It doesn't require that they charge cost. Nobody from the state is saying, oh, you Bedford, you can't, Lexington, Bedford, you can't do this. But the IMA statute clearly contemplates that municipalities are going to charge one of those based on what their costs are and recover their costs. So it does seem as though if somebody were to try to challenge it, it would be hard to justify this. No one knows if it's right. However, nobody's argued with one another for 30 years. There, as far as no one knows, there have been no lawsuits about this. Okay, let's go ahead. Next slide. Now, there's a particular clause which I want to call to your attention, which is the notion of early termination. And they're often asymmetric because if you're the supplier, if you're the supplying town, your situation is different than if you're the receiving town. That's what we see here. Bedford can terminate this with 180 days notice. The new contract says, Lexington recognizes that Bedford's an MWRA community, meaning they've paid the $7 million. And so if you want to, you can get an easement. No, it says we'll cooperate. Presumably that means Lexington will cooperate by allowing Bedford to have an easement through Lexington to get to the pipes if they want to do it directly. Hasn't happened. Lexington on its side can terminate with 5 years notice and there's no payments in either direction. We have an agreement, one second, we have an agreement with Ashland in which we can terminate, but there are, depending on when the termination occurs, if it is done by Southborough, there are compensatory payments by the part of Southborough to Ashland for amounts they have paid to us already in getting started.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's okay.
So the slide, so Lexington can terminate with 5 years notice. That's under the current.
Under the
contract, not
current-
The original.
No, it's under the current contract.
Okay, yeah.
Under the original contract, I don't remember, it's not around now anyway. This is the current contract.
Yes.
I was surprised that there's no specification of dispute resolution, but apparently there haven't been any disputes. That's even better. Okay, let's go ahead. So if you ask them about the problem, are there any problems? Oops, let's go back one. Okay, you do hear about low pressure sometimes in Lexington, and Lexington saying, hey, we want to put on usage restrictions because Bedford, you're using too much water and the pressure is low in Lexington. But apparently it's not very bad. And it's possible that some capital expansions should have been undertaken or should be undertaken in Lexington to handle Bedford at its peak usage. But they haven't done them. So, the design that we're looking at now, at least according to the PAR engineering report that we have right now, on the other side is like, we're going to have to deal with high pressure, not probable low pressure, if it is as spec'd. So pressure, you make big changes like this, pressure things of some kind happen. In our case, it may be high pressure, but in their case, it was low pressure. Water dormancy, basically, or age, refers to how long the water is sitting in pipes. And in Bedford, that can be a problem because they're at the end of the line. You can think of it as they're the last to get the water, and some places get the water kind of slowly. So it's been in the pipes since it's been treated for a long time. It's measured in days of dormancy, but it helped Lexington. So it's going to be the same story here. If we're pumping a lot of water to Bedford, it should help our dormancy issues. If we're pumping a lot of water to Hopkinton, it should help our dormancy issue. Pumping to Bedford, Bedford's in trouble. Okay, let's go ahead. All right, so that's the update. Now, so Karen spoke to Lexington people, but Lexington people were harder to get a hold of. The person from Bedford, believe it or not, is the person who negotiated or was involved in negotiating the Ashland water supply contract. Used to be at Ashland, is now over at Bedford, was very forthcoming and helpful. If we need any more information, we can, but I think we've pretty much gotten to the end of it. Okay?
Can we ask a few questions before we move forward?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody else wanted to go first, but John, so with the going back to slide 6 where it talked about they charged the 1.01 and whatnot,
Yeah.
and you talked about the what's it, not the bylaw,
The base
the
charge.
statute, when you talked about the statute as well. Is there like a cutoff on what you can charge or how much you can charge? Or
No, the statute, I'm not the person to speak that, but I've read the statute.
Yeah.
The intermunicipal agreement statute covers the possibility of exchanging all kinds of services, trash,
Okay.
and it could be anything, trash
Okay.
pickup, water, sewer. So there's no way of this. They just refer to the supplier community. It contemplates basically a community that has something, a service that's going to provide to another municipality.
Yeah.
And it talks about charging for your costs. That's as far as I would go. It's, it doesn't say make up a price. It says charge for your costs. But it's basically framed in terms of one community getting its costs paid for by the other community is kind of the implication underneath the intermunicipal agreement statute.
So as you understand it, capital, building in something for capital shouldn't be necessarily an issue.
It's not a statutory issue as far as I would say,
Okay.
pretty soon here, we're gonna need to get some town council members, but I don't see there's any, it seems
Okay.
like the statute is quite open-ended. I merely was pointing out that, just making up a price is not kind of in the spirit of the IMA statute. I mean, that's what Lexington and Bedford, they just made up a price. They said, okay, we'll charge you this. No one knows what the relationship to the costs are. But the IMA statute talks about cost passing.
Okay. This question is actually for Mark. Mark, do you know if we were able to answer the questions that Sherry Wittes had sent in? Were those finished? I know that you had done quite a few of them. I just wondered if she had gotten some answers on those.
She seemed satisfied with the answers that I provided. Again, unfortunately, a lot of the answers were, these are going to be, this item is going to be subject to negotiations. And, so a lot of it was too forward-looking
Yep.
to give an answer, but everything we could answer at this point, we did. And so,
Perfect.
Ms. Galligan provided a lot of that information.
Okay, and then just one final comment. I found it interesting when you said that Bedford supervised the work in Lexington.
Yes, I think that that's, if they're gonna pay for it, Bedford paid for the work of the connections.
Yeah.
And therefore, they hired the contractors and supervised the work. But then, once it was completed and accepted by Lexington.
Yeah.
Then each town maintains its own and owns its own. So, the pipes and things are now owned by Lexington. The connections are now owned by Lexington.
Okay, thank you. That was it for this part.
But that comment, that does seem like a pretty fair way to do it, in the sense that if I'm Bedford, I want to be careful to make sure the work is done well, so the pipes will operate
Right,
appropriately.
right.
So, to me, aligned motivation.
And also, by the way, that's what we did with Ashland.
Yeah, that's what we did actually.
Karen,
It
you're
didn't
welcome
work.
to come up here.
Okay, well, that was all my questions for now.
Okay.
Hello.
This is Chelsea.
I
She asked me Chelsea.
was gonna be on time.
She said she's gonna raise her hand, but
She
she's,
does, okay,
okay, so we just gotta watch for her hand to raise if she's got a question.
okay, thank you.
Another quick question, John, and this was the only other intermunicipal agreement of this form that you could find at this point.
Well, there isn't a systematic way to find these
Right,
things,
yeah.
but Mr. Favallaro seemed to know of them.
If Joe didn't know much about it, then.
Yeah,
it's
so,
probably
and
not-
he pointed us to this one. Now, the only other one that I've had any discussion possibility of using the simulation software to estimate water flows or the capital resources that are used to supply another community, and that was discussion about the city of Providence. Because PAR does their engineering, the city of Providence water system. That's the only one I've had. So I discussed with folks at PAR, the Providence supply arrangement with 10 surrounding communities, but it doesn't get in, the legal aspect of it was not something to go into because it's different state, different enabling statute, et cetera.
Interesting.
Did Joe know about the Ashland Southborough IMA?
I suppose so, but I wasn't asking about that since we had all that information at hand anyway. And I was looking for some new comparable, so, yeah.
And if I can add one thing, and I apologize, John, I should have started with this. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think this, for me, was super informative and actually helped guide some of the questions or things I might look for in the LOI. So
Oh, you're welcome. Now,
I should have started with that.
I
appreciate
also, I mean, the last meeting, September 20th, you recall, a lot of my concerns were like, how are you going to manage this thing? You have two and it is reassuring to talk to a community that's been doing it for 30,
Yeah.
years and not had any big arguments about it. And, so that if we had found the opposite, I'd tell you, I would be here with a lot more concerns about it. I mean, if they said, well, we've had 3 lawsuits, I mean, that wouldn't be encouraging. You wouldn't want to, say, well, we really have to, that'd be troubling.
Maybe one of the factors is that the water system operates in some sense independently of other parts of the town. So this cost gets spread across the water users out there. So it, I guess it's less spotlighted than some of the normal budget kind of things.
Yeah, and once you get it running,
Insulates
once you get it running, it just runs, right? Except when it breaks.
And it gets a lot of
Okay.
attention.
All right, so let's go to LOA.
Okay, so I provided you with, I thought, an awful lot of detailed material, and it would be possible. I was a little concerned that that we not lose sight of the big questions that you need to answer. Okay, so that's what I tried to summarize those. And then whatever amount of detail you want to go into with regard to the rough draft material or the model invoice, that sort of things, we can go into that. But I wanted to be sure that the questions that I think you need to answer in order to go back to Hopkinton, those are highlighted. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. So I tried to put them down in order of importance. So there's a bunch of capital expansion. This slide does have a typo on it. So there's a bunch of capital expansion that's required. The new storage facility, standpipe at Oak Hill Road, enlarged mains, expanded pumping capacity, that should say. The mains are the piping capacity. So, and there would be some other miscellaneous costs. So Hopkinton came to us with a proposal in June that those costs be shared. And then we kind of looked at it in I would say the gist of the September 20th report to you was, it doesn't look like anytime soon we would be doing those things on our own, so we might at some point, we may come out of this if we do this with a more robust and maintainable system. But would we be spending that money on our own right now? We both agreed that the answer is no, probably not in the next 5 years. So in that situation, what do you want to ask Hopkinton to pay for with respect to the capital improvements? That's your decision. And so I think if we don't answer that, then we can't really go back to Hopkinton with anything new. You either say, yes, I accept the notion that we're going to pay half of it or a third of it, or no, we think Hopkinton should pay for it. That's your call. And that's a question you need to answer. You can either take these up piecemeal. I got about 5 or 6 of these questions I think you really should answer before you get back to Hopkinton. But you can take them up one at a time now, or we can get through all of them, however you'd like to proceed.
How about one at a time? Okay, all right, so let's start on this one.
So in other words, you're gonna go through each of the 6, and then we all have opportunity to ask questions.
Just the opposite, we're going to talk about them one at a time, and why they're fresh.
Yeah.
And then go on to the next one.
Okay.
Okay, so here's our first one. So this is kind of crux of the deal. Business deal.
Can you refresh my memory of what is the total cost of the construction of any of this thing?
Yeah.
6 or 7 million or something?
Is it 8 in our town? And because their whole thing is like 25 million?
No, that they're, so I don't have that
Just
number right here
ballpark.
with me, but it was like $4 or $5 million
I think
for the
the
standpipe,
tank.
and then they proposed paying for the mains and the pumping. But
And half of the standpipe, I think.
That's right, and the standpipe was in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 million. It was not more finely estimated than that. It was 3 to 5 million for that now. And then the other pieces I never focused on because they were proposing to do it anyway.
So the difference between what they
Could be as much as $2.5
is
million.
basically the other half of Oak Hill tank.
Yes, which was estimated, the way I would say at the rough stage, not to exceed $2.5 million bill to us if we paid half of it and they paid half of it.
Any idea what the rest of the construction cost for Hopkinton?
For some reason, I
That's
thought it was
ballpark.
like $8 million worth
That
of
could-
work
that-
total
that could
in
be
our
right.
town that they would be doing.
I could look it up or provide that
The
to
full
you,
tank or
but
half the tank, Karen? The 8
No,
million?
not-
That was total with the
that's
tank in.
that's the pipes and the pumping and the expanded
But
pumping.
with half the tank in there?
No, that was the whole tank. Like it was $8 million worth of work, I think,
Work in
total.
Southborough, okay, so
Yeah.
yes, the whole tank.
So if that's correct, it means there's $3 million for the other items, that is the mains and
The
3 to
pump station
right,
upgrades.
right, the pump station upgrades.
So it
Upgrades,
sounds
by
like-
the way, so you should be aware that the term upgrades with respect to the pumping is correct with regard to greater capacity needed to serve Hopkinton. But it may be, if we were on our own, it might actually would be a downgrade, okay? Not because it would have greater capacity, but it might use more electricity to pump the same amount of water, okay? So it might be something that we don't know yet. We have to look at that. But it could be that it's like saying, I'll take out your 6-cylinder engine and put in an 8. Okay, well, great, it's a more powerful engine, but maybe it costs more gas, you know? So it could be a little bit like that. We don't know. Right now, we're kind of right-sized, okay? Fair enough.
Okay, so the question for us to discuss is, it sounds like Hopkinton's already agreed to spend about $5.5 million. The proposal was to spend about $5.5 million in Southborough, and we spend 2.5. So that kind of, I think, is a range we work with. Do we want to ask them to spend the whole $8 million? Given what John said, what Karen has agreed to, that we probably wouldn't do these things for quite a while, except for the fact that we've got to do those to accommodate Hopkinton.
So John and or Karen, do we know what the type of excavation work or work on the pipes is going to be in Southborough? I mean, is it something that's going to stretch down Southville and go, then we're going to have to talk to Ashland to go down Oak Hill to get to the pipe? I mean, obviously for me, there's a level of inconvenience to the citizens of Southborough. Our roads are going to be dug up and then you've got to wait a season for them to settle and it's going to look like Parkerville Road. Then I think for me, that's a very big consideration, but I don't know the scope of the project as far as our roads are concerned and what's going to be dug up.
So it is the places they're replacing, they are replacing long stretches. So it would be like that, where you would have, and residents might be on bypass or something in the meantime. On the same instance, that's one of the things is the repair afterwards. And, you know, I've had discussions with the director quite a bit. Is something that is also up for negotiation beyond the actual cost of the work in town, is the, whether or not you say, well, we actually want to restore the road better.
So
Right, so that option, or even to say, we want you to give us the money so that we restore the full road, you're paying half, you're paying for the pieces that you broke up or whatever. So that negotiation is definitely something that's on the,
So I should add that, first of all, I don't know the exact route of the
Okay.
pipes. Now, I don't know whether Karen knows the exact route of the pipes that are.
the ones that are being most, I should know them by heart, but I don't. I know, all I can think of is the couple coming down from Parkerville on the south side. There's some, and then it runs, so Cottage Street ends up kind of entering into it somewhere.
So
Interesting.
So one of the aspects of this, which Karen touched upon, so I think there are two parts to it. One is just inconvenience to Southborough because of digging.
Yeah.
And I don't know that right now, I haven't seen a map. I don't know there is a map. And the other is quality repair afterwards.
Yeah.
With respect to the former, we don't have final design and I haven't seen a map. I think there's going to be a fair amount of digging, but Karen would know better about that. With respect to the second part, the way I drafted the proposed language was that the installation of the new pipes would be contracted for, and if you choose to say so, paid for by Hopkinton. But the street repair would be done by Southborough and reimbursed to Southborough by Hopkinton, because I thought that the quality control of the street repair should be in our hands.
Yeah.
Now, all of that is preliminary. I mean, that's just
Right.
stuff I put down on paper. You haven't taken any positions on any of it yet. But I just wanted to explain the two aspects. As for the exact where the digging is, I don't know that anyone has that finalized yet. It certainly was not, here's the map, in the proposal. Didn't come through that way.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's done.
Was there a
yet.
lot of digging with Ashland?
Let's see, no, we didn't have to resize most of our pipes. So there was some to put redundancy by the Hosmer station, because we didn't have it, so that got added, it was nice by them. But that's not a public road really that anyone's using. And other than that, it was down on Oregon Road.
Right,
At the-
wasn't
at
it
the line.
almost, it was over 1 million, between like 1 and 1.3 million in upgrades. to-
Yeah,
That
in
were gonna need to be
Southborough.
made at some point in Southborough, they covered the cost.
So in that case, where there was road work on Oregon, whatever, Ashland paid for the entire repair of the roads also, yes?
yes,
Mhm.
But we did the road work, we actually did repair ourselves, and they reimbursed us or gave us the money to do that.
no, they actually ended up doing that paving with their own contract, because it was a very little piece in Southborough.
Yeah.
It was very
At the-
little,
Like at the line.
yeah.
on Oregon, yeah.
So I might mention, just in the sort of total constellation of facts here, is that Hopkinton had approved this preliminarily in their own processes with the view that they might have to spend $12 million on MWRA entrance fees. Currently, it looks like those are going to be waived. And so their total project, they were estimating the thing might cost 25 million to get through this. So in terms of the total picture, the half the standpipe isn't a big part of the deal. But I'm not telling you what the answer should be with regard to that, but
Right.
that's, I think that we come out of this with a more robust system, probably not one that we would need to undertake doing right now. I mean, that's kind of where it is.
And that to me is the key to the whole thing. So let me just kind of kick this off with consideration, then you guys can modify it. I would, if you're just me and I was sitting down, I would absolutely ask Hopkinton to pay for it from beginning to end. I don't think we should do the work yet. We'll get to that. As far as control, but as far as the cost, whether it's reimbursed or whether they do the work, I think that they should put the cost of doing this work kind of from A to Z.
I agree.
I guess I'm generally aligned with that. I think two key points. One that I was not aware of until John dug into it with Karen here, that we would probably not be doing this work ourselves anytime in the near future. So therefore, to me, that pushes the cost onto Hopkinton substantially. And also, as John alluded to, there's a third-party payer here, which is the MWRA. And in fact, now a couple of months ago, the MWRA Board of Directors voted to waive the entry fee for new water communities for the next 5-year period here. And so that's money that, unless something very strange happens, Hopkinton would not have to pay that entry fee at this point. Therefore, it seems to me that it's another reason that they had planned for that kind of number, that we would not actually take a major portion of if they paid the whole cost for this. And I think it's important to, as part of that, I think it's fair for us to say we want to be made whole for this, which includes the paving stuff. And we're not going to be made whole in one sense, in that in terms of inconvenience to residents who are living in some of the construction areas, which is unfortunate. On the other hand, my view is that offsets some of the value of the robustness addition to the system here. So I think that's, to me, a fair trade-off. So I guess my bottom line is agreed with Lisa and Kathy that I think that at least the starting point for us is certainly to say, leave us whole out of this, and we'll work out the details in terms of who pays, who reimburses, and who supervises, those kind of things.
I agree. I think that it's a very important term. Because when you think about what are the benefits to Southborough of this project, as you mentioned, the capital improvements that are contemplated are things that are not necessarily things that are near-term items for us. And as I understand it, the primary benefit in terms of a way in which our system becomes more robust because of these improvements would be reducing the 2 pressure zones into 1. Is that right?
So it's a little bit of a mix. So,
It's a mix, go ahead.
Okay.
so like our top 6 things right now in our master plan is a Newton Street water main replacement, which we did, right? A new high service tank, Oak Storage tank replacement, Oak Hill, Presidential Drive and Fisher Road connection, Lovers Lane water main, and Fairview Skylar. Okay, that neighborhood, we need to put a little pump station because they've got low pressure. So those are the top 6 things. This does take away 3 of them, right? By combining the system, right?
Oak Hill, Fairview.
So this takes away the new high service tank and the Oak Hill storage tank.
Yeah.
And it takes away the Fairview Skylar because that pumping station would be put in as part of this project.
Okay.
But it does do it by combining it into 1 tank, into 1 service. Now, again, if we went with 2 services, we would service areas, we still have to increase the size of Oak Hill regardless for ourselves. And that's actually a lot more necessary than people think. Like that tank is, it's very narrow. It's 25 feet diameter, 25-foot diameter. So it goes up and down a lot. And so quickly. So we pump extra because we can't actually keep that full, right? And then there's water aging that happens at the other tank in that system. In the higher pressure, we can clean that current tank, but we can't repaint it or anything. We can't maintain it at that level because it's the only tank. And since that went in, we were able to paint it in when I first started. So like in
04.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, so in 04, so it was 4 years after I started, but we were able to paint it. But since then, with the water usage and everything, it's a very tight window when we can take it offline and paint it and between temperature and usage, right? So we have a lot more high people at the higher elevations because that's what's left to build on in a lot of places. So that's part of our robustness. And then, so having the ability to maintain the tank is huge for us. Having the pressure, the low pressure area adjusted, that fixes a huge issue that we have in terms of like in the Skylar area. And then the other big issue is that we have spots that we know we need to get pipe and replace it. So you have large capital projects that are kind of new or upgrades, and then you have replaced pipe. Well, the replaced pipe keeps kind of bouncing its way out because these other ones become necessary sooner. So Newton Street got to the point that we were like, no, we can do that one. But that's one of the things that does help the system is by taking some stuff off the table, it brings those up sooner. So in a way, that also adds robustness to our system by allowing us to get to that project sooner.
So Karen, will some of these things you just talked about, these 3 things, will that help the pressure over by Neary and Trottier, where we heard there was a little bit of issue on? Will this robustness in the system kind of help that as well?
Yes, so it's not pressure that we have problem with, it's flow over there,
Okay.
but it would, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just one other observation is, and this kind of skips ahead to the second slide about costs, is, the structure you have in mind for costs is really, you're going to come up with formulas so that if there is an interconnection, first you would do the capital improvements, put in the structure, and then you have the linkage, and then on an ongoing basis during the term of the agreement, Hopkinton would be paying Southborough a share of the cost of maintaining our system and also cost of pumping, et cetera, et cetera. Those two things kind of go together in a way that I think makes a very fair contract, and that the capital improvements that likely wouldn't be occurring in Southborough for a long time would be borne by Hopkinton, and then going forward by charging costs, the Southborough is not making money on.
Right, it's not the goal to make money.
It's, so I think combined, those two things are a very fair arrangement for both communities. So
I think so also.
Okay,
The trick is us to determine what those costs really are, because some costs are obvious, some costs are not so obvious.
and that's kind of getting ahead into.
Yeah, it is getting ahead.
But there's nowhere, and this gets into how, deep into the weeds you get.
You do on weeds.
I'm good on weeds.
Yeah, I mean, there's only how, you can only go into the weeds so deep tonight, but everything that you have in mind is just fairness. It's a way.
That's
that
right.
on an ongoing basis. So when Southborough needs to spend money to, for example, maintain a pipe going forward, because Hopkinton is using X% of the increased capacity of the new system, they're going to pay that exact X%, not X times.
Right,
Which is what she does.
that's the goal.
Yep.
And we're not proposing an administrative fee like the Ashland thing for.
Well, why don't we, yes, I think there's some detail on the ongoing cost charging coming up later.
So we're gonna have a whole discussion on that cost. There is a proposed for upfront cost, $64,000. We're gonna get to that, to stay on the capital, but just to make sure I understand. If the Oak Hill tank is fortified like you're talking about here, what happens to Overlook?
So Overlooks still stays online at this point. We think we could make it, but it will be, because it's not gonna be the same height, it's really just gonna be almost more of a, it's almost more of a pressure roll off in a way, right? So as you're pumping, it's got a spot that if you exceed, if we're pumping full and the pump fills, that'll take a difference. And it kind of keeps it even in that area. But it might be that we say, yeah, you know what? It's really not fluctuating at all. Let's just take it offline.
Okay, so Overlook maybe, Oak Hill is gonna be fortified. You're gonna do the small pumping station over in the Skylight
Yeah.
area, and Terra goes away?
No,
No.
Tara stays.
Okay, all right, so we do still have
Yeah,
three
so
tanks here.
to
Okay.
be clear, with two zones as we have now, we have only one storage facility in one of the zones, in the low
Terra.
zone. No,
High-
in the,
the high zone.
in the high zone. We only have one storage facility there. The problem with that is that because it's its own zone, it's as though it's its own system and you can't shut it down. And so the problem we have right now is we have no redundancy in that zone to shut a storage facility down for repairs. If you make this one zone, then the three different storage facilities all act as redundancy for one another. You can take any one of them down. That's the robustness advantage. We were able to paint the Tara Road tank, right, in 2004, even though it was the only one we had, okay? And we did that in October. If you look at the pattern of usage, that's the time when you can't do it in midwinter because it's too cold. And you can't do it in the summer because the demand's too high. So you got one window to do. We did it in that window in 2004, which happened to be the peak of the highest point of usage in the town of Southborough was in 2004. We got it done. It can be done, but it's a lot harder than if we had a single zone system with redundancy all around. That's the robustness we gained from this, is that single zone system. We probably should have had a single zone system all along. We only have 20 feet difference between the high and the low. It's not like we have a mountain range out here. And so we probably never should have gone to a multi-zone, but we've had it and we get out of it with this. It's not something we'd spend the money on at this spring town meeting, but it's better.
Trying to check with Chelsea.
Okay, so we're gonna bring Chelsea over. So Chelsea, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think at a minimum, we need to include all the costs for Hopkinton for this project that they would pay for it. But I also think that we need to look at our current capital plan for what else outside of this project we have and include that in there as well. I think with the inconvenience that this will have for residents, I think there needs to be some incentive for the town of Southborough.
Chelsea, I'm not sure what you're talking about, including in the capital plan.
She's talking about including things that are unrelated to letting Hopkinton do this, that are in the water capital plan, and asking them to pay for them just
Oh.
because we are going through the inconvenience of doing this.
Like the Fisher Road connection or something, maybe potentially.
Those are things that's certainly one of the items on our list that's unrelated to this.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't have an updated capital plan, Sam, so I'm not exactly sure what's on it, but that's what Kathy articulated it correctly.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we've talked about, first of all, so Chelsea, before we get to what you just said, you're at least in agreement with, we want Hopkinton to pay for 100% of what has to be done in Southborough to accommodate the connection, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we've all agreed on that. And then the next issue is what Chelsea's proposed, which is to ask them to pay for things that are unrelated, that are on the capital plan that are unrelated to, or don't have to be done because of the Hopkinton water connection.
I guess I don't object to that. On the other hand, I think there's a fine line between being too greedy, if you will, and being fair. So I waffle on that, I guess.
I guess if it's for a first discussion with Hopkinton, sometimes asking for a little more doesn't certainly
I mean,
hurt.
that's kind of the way negotiation goes.
Yeah.
So your first meeting is basically, here is, in a perfect world, here's what I want. And then, after everything is out on the table, it's like, okay, now what is
Yeah.
real, what is doable, we're really, do we need to be?
Well, if this weren't a public meeting, I might agree.
Mhm,
But
mhm. I know, it's,
Well, but no, I mean, to Chelsea's point, and this is something that's really, it's not asking Hopkinton to pay for some of those costs isn't just in Southborough's interest, but it may also be in Hopkinton's interest because in order to have support for this in Southborough, that it helps to explain why there's maybe some additional benefit to it, to Southborough beyond, the component of
Robustness.
yes.
Mm.
Well, on
But I
the
think
other
too-
hand,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
sorry, you have the idea of it has to get support in Hopkinton.
True.
Yeah.
Fisher Road, that seems kind of more remote from, geographically remote from this situation.
Then there are other projects that, again, don't have to be contiguous to this one. I think that Chelsea's point, it could be other projects.
There are several on the list.
Yeah.
I mean, the list has not been, so to be clear, I didn't vote, I specifically excluded those from my consideration because I had enough to do. And they were not connected to Hopkinton, but there is a list of them. Karen read some of them.
Well, Andrew does make a good point, though, in the sense that it seems to me likely that we're going to have to go to town meeting for some money to do this in terms of the third party. Look at the engineering stuff that presumably we would pay for, I think. And Karen, I think, can attest to the fact that there's a great sensitivity around road construction. Like Parkerville, I know all of us have gotten great complaints about the Parkerville situation and other places as well. So anything that we can do to offer some offset for residents to want to support this would be very helpful, I think. So that's an interesting angle on this.
Like, would just a couple things to point out. So it would bring items up into our paving plan quicker. Right, so now we would have better roads on those areas sooner than we necessarily would otherwise. And the other thing is the third party review. I think that's something that Hopkinton would be more than willing to pay for. And that's something where you look at it and you say, do you need anything more than that, than to have a third party that we can choose, but they're giving us the money to pay. We're getting some new roads, we're getting some robustness, new mains, and then in the meantime, we're actually giving water to people who desperately need it.
And I think one thing too, that we still need to also think about is, I'm certainly all in favor of asking for whatever it may be. But still cognizant of the fact that if Hopkinton says no, and they totally skirt Southborough, they could go, whether it be the legislature, MWRA, and they could ask, and we would get nothing. We wouldn't get the upgrades that we're getting now. So I think we kind of, that's not a guiding factor, but it's something to certainly consider as we look at. how we move
I
forward.
think it's unlikely that MWRA would ever force something like this. It would be the public health concerns of legislature and so
Yeah.
forth, maybe potentially. But,
Okay,
we're better off certainly managing it ourselves.
Yeah.
If we can, I think.
Yeah.
think Chelsea
I
has a
am
hand again.
usually very aggressive about trying to generate new revenue, whatever, so keep taxes down. But in this case, I would feel very uncomfortable voting to ask for things totally unrelated to this project, given we are going to get a benefit with what we are going to ask for, which is the work that does have to be done, the upgrades we're going to get. So I would stick with the original discussion we had and basically stick with 100% of all the capital expansion costs in Southport related to the project and not add on something that's totally
Well, I
unrelated.
think that includes road repaving and so forth.
I
as
agree,
well.
I agree,
think that's
absolutely,
whole, that's it.
absolutely, yeah,
After-
absolutely. 100% of it, not
Yeah.
half of it, like one meeting to discuss, and
Yeah.
then half of it. No, I'm saying 100% of everything that gets touched, including the Oak Hill tank, as far as the changes there. I am very comfortable asking them to pay for it.
Chelsea's hand.
So, okay, and then just of the 6 priorities in the, that you were talking about in the master plan. So, Newton Street is,
Complete.
yes, underway. And the Fairview Skylar would be taken care of this.
As part of this, yes.
And upgrade system storage in the low service area, upgrade system storage in the high service area, that this would be taking care of this.
Yes.
And then the others are really, the remaining ones are kind of geographically very far from.
Fisher and Lover's
Yeah.
Lane.
Is it correct that just geographically, the pipes that would need to be worked on are gonna be more on the southwest? Not things in the northeast? No,
No, so,
no, okay.
yeah, if you think of the system as your starting point is pumping stations, right? And
Okay,
then the ending point would be Hopkinton. So and it'll be the larger mains that it takes to get there. That it'll use because you're using more water, right?
Yeah.
So those mains would be the the ones more affected.
So it goes across town.
Okay,
That's, the mains go across town because the aqueduct's on the north side and Hopkinton's on the south side. Right?
Yeah.
So there you go.
okay,
But some of the projects that are on the list are geographically disparate, as you point out, and are
Yeah.
unrelated
yeah,
to
okay.
this. So,
I guess I'm not a huge fan of, extensive back and forth negotiation, I guess. I tend to be more direct about this kind of stuff. Say, here's what we need, and there's not a lot of wiggle room in it.
Yeah.
And let's see if we can strike a deal around it.
Chelsea, is her hand still up? I
Yes.
just can't see her hand. Okay, Chelsea, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't put my hand down. I still think that as a resident, it's going to be a difficult sell, I think, for us on this, with just the upgrades that we talked about that we don't need to do. I think that there needs to be something else to benefit the residents who live on a different part of town or whatever. So I still stand by what I said earlier.
Okay, any further discussion on this one? Has anyone, if you not gonna ask for a vote yet. We're gonna go through these. Has anyone changed their mind about 100% of all the capital cost versus adding on one or two of what's on the master plan, for example, on top of that?
Well, I think to Chelsea's point, sending a signal that our starting point is 100%. And there has been concern expressed about the need to get town meeting approval. So we may need to think about some additional things as we communicate about the process and get input from the public on it, et cetera. So this, leave the door open
I
for
Okay, so
additions that might be necessary to get the support.
the floor is the
Yeah.
100%. Everybody
Yeah.
agrees
Oh,
with that?
absolutely.
Right.
Okay, I might make a suggestion. I could respect either path on this thing completely, but I might make a suggestion, which is that I don't know if it's possible. Can we find out a map of the digging? Can we find that out
Yes.
more exactly? I mean, I don't know if they have it at the level of specificity that we have right now. But I could say, we could take an action item between now and some approach here to try to get a more exact map of where we think we're gonna have to dig. And secondly, try to price out a couple of these other sweeteners that we might. I will say that I thought that if you wanted to go to town meeting and say, we want you to approve a debt offering of $2.5 million for something we weren't gonna do, I thought you would have a tough road to hoe. But on this one, whatever you guys want to do, I mean, whatever the board wants. I think we could come back, however, with that additional information. You could look at, okay, so this is where we're going to dig, maybe. We may not be final, okay, because the final plan isn't done. And here are a couple of things that if you could help us out with it, it would make it easier for us to get this whole thing through. People don't like their streets being dug up.
I think that sounds like a pretty good
Sounds
plan.
reasonable. Yeah.
All right,
So
if you're not going to
Chelsea-
vote right now, we could go on and look at some of the other
Yeah.
questions.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, then the next one is, we talked in September about an independent engineering audit. Karen was going to try to get a number on the cost of this. You did. Okay, the subject came up in September meeting of whether we should be concerned about the fact that Hopkinton and we, at our suggestion, are using the same engineering firm, whether there's a
Yep.
conflict. I wouldn't personally say it, that I think there's a conflict, but I think we should have an independent review that we should pay. And I think that we should choose them and pay them. That would be my recommendation on this particular item. And then the question again is, should Hopkinton reimburse us for that? But it's important, I would suggest to you, it's important that we hire this firm
It's our
and we pay
contract.
this.
Yeah.
They have to be contracted to us.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if these things can go wrong.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee, there's no guarantees that it works when you turn it on. And so, if you haven't had an independent review,
And this is, it's a very familiar concept of the peer review.
Right, and I don't think, I mean, I talked to Hopkinton a little about it and they obviously have no issues. I was thinking that it might be a review of the entire design and Hopkinton
yes.
also. So it's about 10%. So it'd be between 250,000 and 350, but just for our piece would only be about 80,000 to 100,000.
I see. So
250, 350 for the whole thing.
that means that the Hopkinton side. of it,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
both sides,
And
yeah,
ours would be, if we just did our piece of it, it's 80.
80,000 to 100,000, yep.
So I presume that Hopkinton would want a cap on what that we're gonna hire somebody, pay them. They would reasonably ask for a cap on the cost.
Yeah.
So I asked Karen to come up with what a reasonable number was. It sounds like if we said the cap is 120,000, we'd be covered.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be doing the Hopkinton piece of this thing, in my view. Now, there's a subtle matter here that eventually would need to get resolved by town council, but the intermunicipal agreement statute vests with the select board the authority to sign these contracts up to 25 years. And they can include obligations to the other community that are binding, independent of any appropriation. So the advantage of that for us is that if when Hopkinton signs with us, they can't subsequently say, oh, we're not paying you for that water because we didn't get the appropriation. They wouldn't have it's just like a debt offering. You have to pay the debt. The state isn't going to let you not appropriate the money and not pay it. So the same is true in this case. So I'm just bringing this up because the wording of the contract in this regard probably should be that we have the option to hire this engineering firm, and if we do, they compensate us up to $120,000. That would mean that it was required, that would, to my way of thinking, again, this would need to go to town council, it would require that it would be an appropriation, because it would not be an obligation to Hopkinton that we hire this firm. It would be simply that if we do it, they have to pay us back for it.
Yeah.
If it's not an obligation to Hopkinton under the contract, then it requires an appropriation from town meeting. Now, I don't think we need to go into this in great detail at this point, because my understanding is from your intention is that you do want, that you're not opposed to this going to town meeting for approval. But that would be the latch, if you will. If we word it that way, then you would reasonably say to town meeting, we need this appropriation, otherwise we're not going to do this. And town meeting would be in its normal authority acting on an appropriation. You could word it the other way as an obligation to Hopkinton, which is peculiar. You could write it that way, and then in which case you would not need an appropriation from town meeting, but the linking between the money coming from Hopkinton and the spending of the money would not occur merely because you wrote the contract. You would still, town meeting would still get to decide how money gets divvied up. It would go into free cash. Town meeting would, So, but if you don't want to try to do this without having the town meeting vote, then you word it as we have the option to do this, and if we do it, Hopkins pays us, and with the full intention that we do it. Is that clear as mud?
Yep.
Okay.
But the idea is that structuring it that way, the town has more oversight and control.
The town meeting would have a key piece of this that would need to be approved by a majority vote.
So if you had a chance to flush it out at town meeting. It hasn't been before then.
Right. All right.
But let's also, I still think it helps sometimes in certain aspects of this to go back and say, what did we do with Ashland? So in Ashland, it's my understanding, I wasn't involved, I think Lisa may come in at the tail end of it, that there was no town meeting approval whatsoever because there was not this cost. So it was truly a select board decision and a signature. Yep.
Yeah, but it was nothing compared to this.
As far as
It hasn't taken a drop of water yet, I
Yeah.
mean, it is just so small compared to this that it's just different ball of wax.
And the upgrades we got for Ashland too were upgrades that were
Yeah.
further up in the capital plan
Yeah,
as well.
that's right.
so.
Yeah. All right, okay, so I think, since the tenor of your previous remarks, and you're going to take one vote at the end, is that you want Hopkinton to pay for the cost of this, and I assume that the reimbursement proposal is something you would want.
Definitely for me.
Me
Sam.
too.
All right, so we go to the next slide.
Chelsea?
I
So
need-
Chelsea's gonna raise her hand when she wants to say
No
something.
hand.
No hand, okay. So that means she agrees with this, unless she raises her hand.
All right, so this next slide is I was asked when I walked in the room here about whether there's a difference between the draft LOI text between 1 and 2, and this is the difference, which is it occurred to me between the months that elapsed that there were going to be some what I've called here establishment costs. The types of things that are in this is that, it would be Karen or it'll be her successor is going to spend more time on this, and there are going to be legal fees associated with negotiating a contract. So there are costs about getting this from where it is today to, hey, it's up and running and the thing is going along and we're billing them quarterly. If you want to charge for those, I would suggest trying to estimate them up front. I'm not sure if there's any special status associated with explicitly offsetting legal fees. I don't know whether that's problematic or not. I don't know, Mr. Purple, do you know if that? Nothing. Yeah, I don't know. But the general principle here is that you could estimate some costs associated with establishing this. We haven't tried to do it yet. But basically, we, circle the, try to figure what they are, maybe they'd be, I don't know.
I think the question is too, whether we need to go outside of our legal firm, outside of town council.
We
Right
got a
now,
fixed fee
everything,
with our town.
right
Yeah.
now, everything is stipended,
Oh.
so.
If they do this kind of a deal on what you're paying Rooney, great, I don't know.
It does a lot for.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess there's a principle here, though. We could probably make a reasonable estimate of the cost of the times likely spent by DPW chief and some second person and legal and, and be reasonable, not
I
crazy.
think we should definitely do this.
Yeah.
She's already spent a lot of time. There's
Yeah.
more time you spent, but she's already spent a whole lot.
Then there are my fees.
That's right.
I don't know if we can afford those.
We'll double that.
Okay, so we'll try to put an estimate of this together.
My concept again, is that's really, I think we need to be made whole.
I think that's perfectly fair, right? All right, so that's the difference between 1 and 2. That's 2 has this in it. Okay, next slide. All right, so I have said here on this slide that my view is that even if you were to reach agreement with Hopkinton about, hey, we're going to charge you, $90,000 a year and 2% over MWRA, I can't imagine doing that and not trying to understand what your costs are. Nobody runs a business that way. Who manufactures a product or sells a service runs it without knowing what their costs
Wait a
are,
minute, this is the government.
except for Lexington, Bedford. Very nice folks, but, so those numbers, we don't have a handle on what the parameters are yet. We know that PAR can tell us what fraction of the pipes are. We have to get all of those numbers in place. But the idea that we're going to charge you what it costs, and here's a list of all the ways in which we think it might cost us, and here's how we might calculate it. That's where we are right now. And the principle only of we're going to charge you what it costs is what we would turn around and say to Hopkinton, if you like that.
I think the cost view, to me, is more defensible, reasonable.
Well, given what John said, the IMA statute said, I agree.
Yeah.
And then given that Lexington and Bedford is apparently made up a number, and neither one knows who's got the better end of that deal, although probably someone does. It does.
For sure, someone
You
does.
just don't know which one.
And the Ashland number is even more vague.
Well, Ashland, if we did this with Hopkinton, as some of you know, there is a lack of specificity in the Ashland contract. We're not selling them any water, so it's not a fundamental problem. But if we did start to sell them some water, the numbers can be pretty large. And so we would take this thing and probably put it back in the Ashland contract after we get it settled up.
And again, that seems to me to be a very reasonable approach. Have you talked at all with PAR about this approach?
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, PAR is the one who, the conversation that took place with PAR was, hey, can you use your simulator to help us out, come up with reasonable numbers here, because we can't put meters all over the place. And they said, yes. And I said, is there any precedent for doing that? They said, yes. We in fact do exactly that for City of Providence, Rhode Island.
Okay.
So it wasn't like, I thought it was going to be, a crazy idea that I had, but no, what they're already doing.
I mean, again, I don't presume to understand all the details, but the model that you sent to us seems to me to make good sense. And as long as we can measure the parameters that go in there, which sound like they are reasonable things to be able to estimate and measure.
The measurement would some of the measurements would be actual meter, it's like the electricity, you're going to pay for electricity. Yeah, some of the, and pumping, but some of the measurements are going to be come out of the simulator.
Yeah, but pipe miles and those kind of
Right.
things as well. So, okay.
I think it makes total sense, and doing it annually makes sense. I mean, the same thing we do right now, ever since we've had the Water Enterprise Fund, Brian Valentine does the computation to estimate the cost of the overhead that the town supplies to the water department and
To what
bills
department?
the Water Enterprise
Oh,
Fund.
yes,
And
that's
so
right.
there is a charge,
Yes.
$250,000 or so that is computed that basically goes from Water Enterprise Fund over to the general fund
Yeah. Okay.
every year. So
Can I ask a question before we move on, or is this the point?
Sure.
we're
All
trying to flush these out one at a time as far as we think.
So this question kind of gets into a little bit of your model invoice, which I know you
Go
don't
ahead.
get too deep into the weeds in it, but a key component of the costs, right, is what percentage, coming up with the percentage, right? Of what.
There are
percent-
two percentages, but go ahead. There are two different percentages, storage percentage and piping
Piping.
percentages.
Okay,
And then, so it's actually, you could say
All
there's fraction of total gallons or 100 cubic foot water pump, that drives electricity costs, okay? And the electricity costs, we pass through to them, okay? Then there is pipe maintenance costs, which is a fraction of the total. We have 87 miles of pipe, but much of that, if you turn Hopkinton on or you turn it off, no different amount of water flows up my street, maybe your street, most streets. It's not going to be any different if Hopkinton's on or off. Therefore, we don't charge them for maintenance for those miles, but we do charge them for maintenance for the miles that are heavily affected when they're on and off. So
So-
that's another percentage.
okay.
And then the third percentage is how much of which storage tanks the flow is affected by them being on or them being off. And we need to, the latter two come out of the simulator estimate. We turn the simulator on, we turn the water on and off in the simulator, find out what happens. The first one is actual measurements of electricity usage in pumping.
Okay.
There are some small ones, there are two very small ones. One is, maybe it costs us more money we don't know yet. Maybe it costs us more money to pump our water because the pumps are bigger and the towers are bigger to satisfy Hopkinton. And that's a pump efficiency factor, or a pump inefficiency factor, as I called it. We assume that's a small number. We don't know yet. And the other is water loss between the pumping station and Hopkinton. All water piping systems have some loss. We need to get a handle on that because MWRA is billing Hopkinton for the water at the Hopkinton border, but some water we're pumping for Hopkinton gets lost because that's inevitable with pipes.
Okay,
So they should pay for that.
so it's not, this is not based on just. Okay, I think I understand.
We tried basically to find all the ways in which it could cost us money. That's what it is. Right.
Looks pretty sensible.
All right.
Okay, so everybody
Uh,
agrees cost
Chelsea
basis,
raised
and
her
we're gonna
hand.
try to identify all costs.
Chelsea has her
Chelsea.
hand
Yes,
up.
yes, yes.
Okay, Chelsea, go ahead.
Thank you. Is there just going to be one enterprise fund for both Southborough and Hopkinton?
Oh,
Yeah, so that won't change, Chelsea. I don't know
Okay.
how they're structured. Ours won't change.
Ours won't change, right? They pay MWA direct, just like Ashland does.
So Southborough would be assuming all of these costs, and then this cost charge, this quarterly usage charge would reimburse Southborough.
That's right.
Just
That's
like
what we-
people pay.
We'll have a
water bills,
wholesale,
they go right
we'll have a
into-
wholesale customer, a big one
Okay.
on a quarterly basis.
Okay.
I think
So
that's all-
in theory, our fund would increase more significantly than it does now, to take into account any capital that would be needed for water main breaks related to additional piping for Hopkinton or increased needs for capital. Is that right?
I think basically the idea is that any costs that they drive, we have been compensated for. That's basically what that's basically the model we're trying to build here.
But our capital budget would reflect pass-through for those additional fees.
Yes.
So if they pay us an extra $500,000 or whatever.
Well, for example, I'm not sure, Ms. Mallon, if this is responsive to your question, but let's give an example of the way this is structured right now is that, let's say in the simulator, we find that Hopkinton uses 70% of the water flow through the Oak Hill standpipe as a hypothetical. And let's suppose that 25 years, so we say that on a 25-year basis, we need to take down the standpipe and paint it, and that costs us $1 million. I'm making up numbers here. So we amortize the maintenance of that $1 million over 25 years, and we charge them 70% of that on an annual basis, 70% of the amortized amount. And so that at the end of the 25 years, we have collected the 70% of the cost of painting that thing, $700,000 out of the $1 million we collected, because they during those 25 years were the 70% user of the water flow through that tank. So that's the way this is structured now. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
That $1 million comes out of our capital budget.
But then $1 million, at the end of it, that comes out of our budget, we pay for it, but we have collected $700,000 along the way because they were 70% users
Is
of it.
that payment interest adjusted? That's interesting. The present value.
I thought I-
He hasn't done that in his proposal, but we're talking about looking at this annually.
Yes.
So the types of things that
So
would
we're not gonna be
come,
stuck with this for 25 years. We do it annually.
Understand.
Well, I should say that one thing that the pipe usage fraction that I discussed with PAR, they thought that 5-year rerunning the model was fine. This isn't the fraction of the pipes that get used to serve Hopkinton are going to get simulated once, and then we should rerun it every 5 years, they thought. I think they know what they're talking about.
So we keep putting the same number for 5 years in a row, then we do it
And
again.
then we do it again, that's right, but some of the others would be annual. Okay,
Right.
next slide. Okay, two other, so I tried to get, there, of course, if you read one of these contracts, they're, you go on for 16 pages or 20 pages, and there are a lot of little terms, but I tried to get the major ones here. So the IMA statute allows you to sign a contract for up to 25 years, and all the ones we've done are 25 years. That is, all the ones we've looked at and done. The Ashland contract and the 2 Lexington Bedford contracts, the original one and the subsequent 25-year agreements. I couldn't see a reason to say no, but it's your call.
I'm fine with 25, but I also like the early termination option.
Try to get some early termination.
Sure.
Stick with 25 first. Everybody happy with 25? That's the most we can do.
For both parties, and I think it's been pointed out, it depends on whether you're buying or selling, which.
Exactly.
when you think about that,
Simply
Yeah.
just
but
like-
there
Yeah.
are terms that
Yeah.
work both ways.
So, okay.
So everybody's
25
okay, 25 years. Now
Let's,
we'll
let's,
talk
let's
about-
move on to number 6 here in the early termination. So we do have an early termination clause in the Ashland deal. It's the only part of that deal that's clear. The Lexington didn't have it in 1993, but they do now. So I wrote some draft text. I think I said after 10, that it could be terminated by us not earlier than 10 years with 4 years notice.
I like that structure, and that seems to me to be fair to them and give us some flexibility.
And by the way,
Something
so Sam, I did write in that, and again, you could, my approach tends to be closer to that which you enunciated before, which is, try to propose something reasonable, but and I said that I was trying to put some language down that I thought was fair to both parties, but what I said in that was that if there were unamortized values in things that they had, and those terms would need to be more carefully pinned down in anything final, but essentially the Ashland contract has a notion that if we terminate it, we might owe them something. What I wrote down was that, if there's something of value that we have, that we might pay them back for it if we terminated it early at the 10-year boundary. If we were amortizing something over 25 years, we might pay them a portion of it back. But, frankly, if you want to do that, it would need to be looked at carefully, because some of the assets that might be on the books are not actually of value to us, like the bigger pumps. Because our pumps right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, but after the Ashland deal, our pumps right now are plenty big enough. We don't need bigger pumps, and we shouldn't agree to pay for them if we terminate the deal, because they're just not something we want.
That's a
So
good
this is
point.
where I would
Yeah.
dig myself in a little bit here and say, I would not want to agree to repay very much for very many reasons. I understand why they need a much different provision to early terminate, they want to get out, they get out, right? I mean,
This is for us getting it.
I understand. So I'm saying, I understand why they need, I just don't know that, we can put the 10 and 4 years of notice in here, but I'm not ready to agree to repay anything.
I'm not
For
either.
that, I think my inclination would be to not propose a term, but to ask Hopkinton what their proposed terms would be.
So not propose at 25 years
No. Let me, or
termination.
to have.
He's picking up on the last, pardon me, you're picking up on the last
So,
bullet. You
okay.
asked them to propose something, what you're saying, if I understand you correctly.
Well, there's two components to this, right? There's one, how early would how early could there be an early termination
By us.
by Southborough? And then depending on how early would be, what additional terms would be
Yes,
attached to that?
right.
So maybe, I don't know, this is what you're driving at, is to propose.
I'm not driving.
Just throwing it out there.
This is what you're getting at.
Yeah, go ahead.
Suggested is 10 years with 4 years notice and just leave it at that.
Fine.
Okay.
For now. And I guess I'm not as opposed to paying something, Kathy, but I would be fairly rigorous about it.
I think you had to be. I wasn't,
See,
I
I'm
didn't know
not,
what
just
you wanted
because I
to do.
want this paid for by Hopkinton. I
Yeah.
don't want it, I don't want to have to pay for it. That's what I want out of this. We're trying to be a good neighbor here, but I want them to pay. for
Okay, so
this.
you want to propose 10 years with 4 years notice and no no buyout.
Or 15 before, I don't know, pick the number, I don't know what the right.
Well, so
number
by
is
the
to
way,
be
my
fair.
view of the
So-
purpose of these clauses, I should say, is that this is the, oh my gosh, they're a pain in the neck clause, okay? That is, you use this if the other side is too much trouble to deal with on a regular basis. You just have to get these people out of your hair. It turns out that instead of being, a good amicable working relationship, they're driving you crazy. That's what you use this for.
Either way.
True.
Yeah, and again, I'm not in favor of asking them to propose something. I mean, I think we gotta tell them what we want.
Okay.
And then if they want to come back to it.
So,
that's
so we
It's
could
kinda
just, you want to just say
complicated.
10 years, 4 years notice and
they say.
that's it?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Initially.
Okay.
All right, I think we're done. Okay, so that's it.
Did Chelsea have
Nothing else.
anything to add to that? Is there a
I
hand up?
like my answer on that one.
Right, I think so. Okay. Okay, sorry.
Well, done with this part at least.
Yeah, I think the question now is how specifically, we took an action item here to try to find out what streets are gonna get dug up and figure out what the cost would be of some of the smorgasbord of non-Hopkinton related items that you might ask following up Chelsea Malinowski's suggestion. So that's our action item as of right now. The question is, how do you want to proceed?
Well, we're getting pretty close to the time we got to sit down with Hopkinton.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
question is, are we ready after this to, basically take this as our guidebook after you answer the couple questions? And sit down and start talking to them about where we think we are.
And how much of the LOI language should we share at this point? I had some comments on that. Too.
No.
I mean, we could, see what you think. We could take this and not the specific language, sit down with them and see where they stand. And if
Yeah,
we get, then
you
we come
could.
back, right?
Yeah,
And really dig
Yeah.
into some of the details.
Yeah.
It looks like we've got an outline of a deal.
Maybe it makes sense to start at the high level, say, are we
Yeah.
on the same?
Yeah,
page,
that's
shall
right.
we?
Yeah.
Does this make any sense to you?
And then let's
Yeah.
dive in if we are.
Chelsea?
Thank you. Just one question related to the amount of water. And John, I'm sure you've gotten some questions from residents around, is Southborough going to run out of water? What kind of safeguards do we have? As you've alluded to that projecting water can be difficult, increase to developments in Southborough and or in Hopkinton. Is there anything that we should consider as part of this first pass from that perspective?
Yes, I did put, there are a half a dozen what might be called minor things that I put in the document that I sent to you. One is that we're gonna, these are all constitute suggestions from me, and we haven't talked about them because we're at the biggest points, but you raised one important one, which is we're gonna agree with Hopkinton, I'm suggesting, that we're gonna supply you with up to, let's say, 4 million gallons a day, right? Or whatever the number is exactly in there. And you can't go over that without coming back to us, and maybe we do a deal to cover it, and maybe we don't. I mean, that is, it's got to be capped. Now, MWRA caps it, but MWRA caps are usually comfortably above where you are, okay? But we need to design this, have this design spec for this system, test it at, let's say, 4.5 million gallons a day, know that it works when we test it, accept it, and then if Hopkinton wants more than that, at some point, because they have growth, they want more than that. Well, come back to us, we'll talk about the deal, but there's no obligation to provide more water. We don't know if they come back and they need 6 million gallons. We don't know if we can do that. We're not promising to do that. So that's an important piece of this thing.
Yeah, not part of the agreement, yeah.
Not part of the agreement.
And another thing I get asked all the time is, say it's a drought.
Yeah, let me address some of those things for a minute. The big picture on that is that Southborough's usage is a little under, is like 0.75% of the MWRA total billed usage. And adding Hopkinton adds about 1%, okay? So those are important perspectives with regard to, how big is this relative to MWRA? It's tiny, okay, with respect to MWRA, and we are tiny with respect to MWRA. Furthermore, they think they have 20% spare capacity. So adding Hopkinton is adding 1/20 of what they think is their spare capacity. So I would say that the overall context we find ourselves in is that the EPA, you may have seen in one of the responses, I thought they were good questions, by the way, very reasonable questions. I think the questions that I had when I started this thing, which is it possible to come up with the water? The answer seems to be yes. The EPA says there's no such thing as global drought. There's worse drought in places that are already dry, and other places that are already wet may get wetter, okay? We are in the sort of middle zone and not expecting global warming to cause more drought here. And furthermore, the trend of the last 50 years is slightly more total global precipitation because more warmth evaporates more water from the ocean. So at that level, at the most cosmic level, and I expect MWRA thinks that they have 20% spare capacity. We're a tiny, tiny part of that. So I think that those are important answers to reasonable questions about, is this possible at all? And the answer looks like yes, this is what it looks like.
So what if, for instance, again, there's one of those
Seasonal,
droughts
periodic droughts.
that we
yes.
get, and Southborough puts a water ban of some type on. Is there some way to work into
That
the
actually,
agreement?
so yes, so MWRA would be requiring, it's a flow down, okay? If MWRA, so Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but MWRA says you have to conserve water, they would say it to all their member communities. Hopkinton would become a member community of MWRA and would be under those same stipulations that we would be by virtue of doing this. They happen to be getting in for free, probably, as opposed to like Bedford paid $7 million, but the rules from MWRA flow down to all the member communities. Is that a fair statement?
Correct, yep.
I've got asked that question
No, that's okay. We
Sure.
a couple
haven't,
dozen times already from different people, so.
in all the years, so in the last 22 years, we actually haven't had MWRA. We got close one time that they were thinking about putting on like the first stage of drought measures, which is, don't wash your cars.
Yeah.
Right? So we really haven't had anything at all,
Ever.
not in the last 22 years.
And MWA has been spilling millions of gallons of water a day from the reservoirs through this drought because they've got a huge capacity.
Yeah. So the situation you have is there's no larger authority that we could presume to substitute our judgment for who says there's a big problem here. And secondly, on the other side, we have a community next to us that can't drink their water. And so between those two, to kind of say, well, we know better than all the, it's really hard.
Thank you.
So one thing too that I think everybody knows, but it's worth saying in public, Sam has put together some FAQs. So we've got a place on the DPW website where all the Hopkinton information is right now. Everybody can go look, including emails, et cetera. Sam has put together some FAQs that we now have all looked at that we're going to post in the next day or so that answers a couple of those questions that you just asked about the drought. Is there enough water, et cetera? So
And then do one more pass on it. For the questions. So.
I do think a lot of people don't realize, I think people think our water comes from reservoirs in the town. And I think it needs to be clear that they don't, right? We don't, yes, right?
I'm sure they do.
The town does not treat any water. It comes treated from the MWRA. So we don't need to treat more water. There's no extra cost for us except the cost of electricity and wear and tear on a pump to get it, to actually pump it at this point. It's not the same as if we had to treat it.
And just getting back to Chelsea's question, the point about what, well, there might be some burden to Southborough, down the road, Hopkinton does another big development, et cetera, that's where the importance of the 5 year, every 5 year, you're looking at the correct way of calculating that
Height
percentage, right? Because that's a way that during the term of the agreement, if Hopkinton is using more water, there's a mechanism for to change, adjust the
More
usage
water
fees.
relative to Southborough.
Yeah, does that make sense? No.
Actually, not exactly.
Okay.
The way we've talked with PAR about estimating so one question is, so we have these 87 miles of pipe and a tiny fraction, we don't know what the fraction is, will be used to deliver water to Hopkinton. They shouldn't pay for maintenance on my street, the maintenance of the pipe on my street, because it's not in the deal, it's not part of the deal.
All right.
So we've said to PAR, run a simulation to figure out what pipes are used to deliver water to Hopkinton when Hopkinton is at the max, okay? In other words, open the spigot up all the way over there, on the simulator, and tell us what happens to pipe flow, okay? So that tells us what fraction of the Southborough piping, 87 miles, is used to supply Hopkinton when it's at the contract max amount, okay? And that number might move if we rebuild pipes in Southborough, or would be the most likely way that number would move. So for example, let's say 4 years from now, we change the piping in some part of town and the water starts to flow more through there than it did on the previous path. Then we redo that and we find that, now instead of 12 miles are used by Hopkinton, 13.5 miles are used by Hopkinton, but it's only sensitive to piping changes on our side. And that's why they say you don't need to do it very often. Now, for things like electricity, we're just going to bill them actual, okay? I mean, it's what fraction, the electricity, we know how many gallons you've used. We know how much it costs in electricity to pump a gallon. We're going to charge you for that fraction of the electricity that you use. So that gets redone. Comes in that time. But piping changes are sufficiently infrequent that
all right,
that's, so that's, I hope it clarifies that.
But Andrew, to your question about additional development opportunity, that's limited by the max.
Yeah,
supply.
that's right.
Okay,
So
Right.
if they
all right.
build, if they double their population, they still get 4 million gallons max or whatever. the number
That's
is.
right.
And that's the criticism I've
Okay.
heard the most from the very
Yes.
get-go
Yeah.
is that, Hopkinton did this to himself. They built all these huge developments, so letting people know that we put a cap on what they can get. So if they want to keep building, they do it at their peril.
Well, by the way, to my way of looking at it, the issue, now they have built in, by the way, PAR has built in a fair amount of headroom for Hopkinton in this, so
With the
that
4.5.
when we test it, we should be testing it at a level that's at a fair amount, gives them a fair amount of growth headroom. But Hopkinton's only 67% penetrated in their residential base. And there's no requirement under state law that residential owners of individual wells retest their water for quality. It only has to be done when the well is first built, which is like crazy loophole. But if that were to change, and you could face a situation where Hopkinton needed to grow a fair amount by needing to extend their piping system to cover the personal wells that may be contaminated. Who knows?
Right, which could actually happen in our town too, because
But we have a much smaller fraction that's on wells compared to
Correct.
What's our
100%.
fraction?
20%.
yeah, yeah. a
Well,
little
there's a
less than
different,
20,
there's a
but-
difference between the fraction that is dependent for wells for all domestic use versus those who have wells.
Right.
Some who have wells are for irrigation only. Some are authorized for domestic use, but are still used only for irrigation. The fraction that is Southborough, that is solely dependent on wells for domestic use, I think is fairly low.
Yeah, it is.
It's
it-
lower
it
than the
is.
number of wells.
Because some get from Framingham. I want to say we're probably
And
at
some
like
get from
5%
Framingham.
in reality that are actually on wells. Is
Well,
it?
my
Yeah, that's
neighborhood,
right.
of course, is all wells because, we are cut off from Southborough. But because of this, we had our water tested. This raised an alarm in my neighborhood. And I had to consult the Board of Health in Southborough to see what they've done as far as helping this. So I called Chelsea. I had lunch this Friday in Acton with two ladies who live there, and they said, "Oh, we've got PFAS in our well here too in Acton." And I said, "What are you guys doing?" "Nothing." And they said that nobody wants to eat at the Dunkin' Donuts because I don't want the water from the coffee. They go to another town. So anyway, so Hopkinton's not in this alone. I know Hopkins got maybe worse problems with everything else, but PFAS seems to.
Yeah, I mean, their water issue isn't necessarily from
Just
growth
PFAS.
as much as contamination.
So how do you want to proceed with respect to, we'll try to close the loop on a couple of those, the cost on that, but how do you want to proceed specifically? Do you want to decide now how you want to proceed specifically with regard to the steps to approach Hopkinton? Because I do think, by the way, you got Thanksgiving and then you got December and, then you
Town
get the
meeting's March
budget cycle.
25th.
Yeah, right.
So time's moving on here. Why not talk soon?
So I think we should leave here, one suggestion would be, and we'll agree, that we should leave here tonight with that plan in place as far as how we approach Hopkinton.
I mean, it seems to me that it makes sense to have someone deputized to have that conversation, maybe as the chair, to talk with counterparts.
To date, just so you know, so Mark has talked to his counterpart, Karen's been talking to hers, and I've been talking to the select board chair in Hopkinton. So the three people have talked to each other, so that has happened.
So maybe that three-person group for each town sits down and says, here's the conversation, here's where we start. And are we in the right ballpark to continue to drive down to the details?
I think that makes sense. Lisa?
Yep.
Karen?
Sense to me.
Chelsea, does that make sense to you? Don't put your hand up if it does.
Put both hands up.
Yeah, that's okay. She didn't put her hand up, so I assume she's good too.
Okay, so everybody's okay with that? Okay.
That's excellent. Glad we're moving ahead.
I will say this, the person who's select board chair in Hopkinton, when I called, she was so nervous about what I was calling about. She thought I was calling to say, give her bad news. I said, no. So anyway, so she is anxious to hear from us.
I don't know if you were anticipating something you were going to say. I really wanted to thank Mr. Butler and Ms. Galligan for all the work they've done. And I know it's a.
I've done this much of anything you've seen.
No, Karen, that's not true. We did a whole lot of
Yeah,
work
no,
to
no,
get this
absolutely.
going.
Where it's a real credit and resource that the town has, and your willingness to volunteer your time to.
I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, just getting ahead out of your, you said the establishment cost might include some of your.
Yes, that was a joke.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Thank you both for coming out. tonight, too.
Sure thing. All right.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
escape when you can.
Okay, all right, so we're almost done. Okay, so chair's report. So, couple things. Mark kind of stole my thunder, but everybody should have got an email today about the draft MOU at St. Mark's. Okay, so I've asked Mr. Purple to talk to Jay Tellerman, our legal counsel, and for him to talk to his counterpart at St. Mark's, and maybe even talk to CFO at St. Mark's, and try to we want this wrapped up by December 20th, which is our second December meeting. So we go, it's done, right? So we get this off our plate and ready for town meeting. Okay, so that's that one. The proposed regional dispatch meeting with 4 towns. So I'm not sure how much the meeting you saw, Mark, the long meeting we had last Wednesday night. But one of the things I was concerned about is what we heard from a couple people, which made me wonder what the other towns are truly thinking about this. But whatever, I think it's time for the 4 towns to sit down. And again, the counterparts sit down and have a meeting to really see where they stand, to see if they're, as far as, because this is very time sensitive. And if we're going to apply for a grant for something,
Right.
we've got to get the 4 together soon and see where they are. So what I asked Mark to do after we talked about that, he is talking to his counterparts in the 3 other towns, asking the 3 of them, the chair of the board, select board, and the group that was part of this, the fire chiefs, in our case, Chelsea, to schedule a Zoom in the very near future, so that we can just lay it out there and see where they are. We know where we are, right? And see where they are, and then report back to select board, so we really know where we're going with this.
Great idea.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, everybody's okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you agree?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's see. Last thing, just to me, since we appointed 2 more people to the community center exploratory committee tonight, that one just needs 1 more. So we need 1 more there. We need 2 more still on CIPC, the new capital standing committee.
Yeah.
And advisory needs 2 too. So we've got 5 that we are, really, we're interested in them all, but we're really interested in those 3. So we should continue to try to recruit people for those. Okay. Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
gonna step out.
Thank you. Yeah. So just to make sure everybody knows what's going on, Ms. Brascio has recused herself from any discussion of the replacement of Ms. Galligan as DPW superintendent because her husband is a snowplow contractor with the town. Mark.
So I'll recuse myself from this discussion and turn it over to Ms. Hale, who has been shepherding this.
So the deadline did close this past Friday. We have 10 applications right now and they're all very qualified people. So I'm in the process of trying to schedule a session with the interview panel, probably not this week with Thanksgiving, but early next week to narrow down who we will bring in for a first round interview and schedule those. We hope, within the first 10 days of December.
Who's
Yes.
the interview panel?
It would include Melissa Danza, our conservation agent, myself. We are talking to a member of the personnel board and another area DPW superintendent to assist us with, for some technical questions. So I think that everybody.
Who's the personnel board person?
We've asked Michelle Jones-Johnson, our new board
Oh, great.
member. So we're just waiting to hear back about her schedule and whether she can assist us. Just want to make sure I covered everybody. And a resident who is familiar with our town departments would be Phil James. To serve on the planning board. He actually contacted Mark and I several weeks ago, asking about the process and if there was anything he could do to help. So he's volunteered his time as well.
Do we not get to see the list of people who responded?
You mean who the applicants are
Yeah,
right now?
yeah.
Generally, the select board has not been involved until the very end.
Yeah.
That's been our practice.
So that's what we agreed to. We agreed that the screening committee would present us, 2 to 4 candidates, qualified candidates, and then we would interview.
Sometimes these lists are confidential because people have not told their current employer that they've applied. So I assume that we have some on the list who are in that position.
I would agree.
Okay.
Okay,
The
so
only person who's seen the list is Ms. Hale.
Okay.
So she is, she's the one who's handling that process. And once the first round interviews are done and they make some decisions on who to send to me, for second round interviews, then I will see those candidates.
This list is locked in the vault now.
Yes.
Medically sealed.
And the second round would obviously include the town administrator, the fire chief, and probably the finance director.
Finance director.
Okay, so let's make sure we got this straight. So process is closed as far as resumes being submitted. Okay, you're not gonna do much during Thanksgiving week or this week. The following week after Thanksgiving, you believe the search committee of you and Melissa and Ms. Johnson are going to, and possibly Phil Jakes are going to get together and basically select the
Who to
resumes
bring
that
in
you
for
want to go
first
for.
round.
Okay, well, first round, right?
Yes,
And then you're doing that with this other group,
that will include everyone we just mentioned.
but not select board yet.
Correct.
Okay, so to go through that, select board sees them after that.
Second round interview is with Mark, the fire chief, and another department head, and all likelihood the finance director. And then the group, I think at that point, both of those groups of people would get back together and talk about, how did those interviews go, and who do we want to recommend for a final interview before the select board.
How many would be on that list for final interviews?
It's hard to say right now, Mr. Starver, since we haven't met them in person yet, but we would expect to send you, I think, at least 2 to 3. Don't you agree?
At least 2 to 3.
Yes,
I prefer to send you 3.
for final public interviews.
I would prefer to see more.
Really? More the better?
So it depends on the evaluation. If there are, I wouldn't object to seeing more. I mean, if there is a strong feeling that we've got 4 candidates, for example, who
We're very
are
close.
very similar in
Yeah,
terms
yeah.
of.
I just want to
overall
make sure,
characteristics.
because again, once the process leaves my hands,
Yeah.
it's up to you. I want to make sure that I'm giving you people that regardless of who you pick.
Yeah.
This would be a good person to fit on our team.
Yeah.
And to provide a good service to the
Yeah,
town.
yeah, but I'm
Yep.
simply suggesting that if you wind up with, 4 of those folks who fit that category.
I'd love to be that.
I'd
Don't
rather-
arbitrarily cut
Yeah,
one of them
yeah,
out.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And then the other question in my mind, from a timing standpoint, is that clearly we go through that process, and if all things, fall into place perfectly, maybe sometime in, mid to
Well,
late
let's roll it
December.
forward. Let's do this,
Yeah,
okay?
we- yeah.
So we're talking about first round, the week of the 28th of November.
Mhm.
Second round, maybe starting at the end of that week, or into the next week. Week of the 5th?
My goal would be, in a perfect world, would be to have everything all set and candidates ready for you just before Christmas. So that potentially the week between Christmas and New Year's, you could schedule, yeah, I know, holidays are tough.
I really, really, really don't want to do that, if we can avoid it.
agree.
We've met so much. Let's see if we can try to do it that week before, if we can.
Available Christmas Eve.
Well, it is.
I'm not at Christmas Eve,
Yeah,
Okay.
well, let's see how
So
it goes.
5th, 12th,
Yeah.
19th, so 19th, 20, 21st, 22nd, 23rd.
But even if we have somebody selected by, end of December, let's say, or early January, chances are somebody's not going to be
You
ready.
still need a bridge.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll
Right,
get to
right.
that. So
Notice
that's what
period
we're gonna
is,
talk about
yeah,
next.
That's where I'm headed, yeah. So,
Okay, so now, Mr. Purple.
yes.
So 2 things. I think we've got to have a plan in place to have an interim director, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then second, to make sure that we have talked to Ms. Galligan and have an agreement with her as far as what she will be willing to do to
Transition, yeah.
transition, et cetera, no matter what day it is,
Correct.
right?
And that is in process.
And is looking for an interim director in process also.
Well, that's not in process yet, depending on the discussions with Ms. Galligan. If she's able to provide a bridge period for 3 weeks, whatever it's end up, again, if you're comfortable with her being that bridge, and again, I need to understand what she can provide.
Yep.
And, and what the terms of that engagement are going to be. And then,
Yeah, I'm certainly comfortable with that concept. But again, as you suggest, it sort of depends on her availability and.
I'm comfortable with the concept. I'm just, yeah, I need to know, again, this is kind of like the discussion back to what we just did with Hopkinton. Comfortable with the concept, need to understand the details.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm working on right now.
But I think we probably should go ahead and, plan A and plan B. Plan A is for Karen, but plan B is to truly have an interim. So I think you should probably go ahead and start thinking about how to do that. Sam has suggested, a retired DPW superintendent, if there is, a group like we found for police. So I think we probably should in parallel go ahead and assume that we need to do that so that, it's the holidays, this is,
Yeah.
if it weren't this time of year, I wouldn't be quite as concerned, but
I mean,
It
I
is this
think,
time of year.
yeah, quite honestly, I think it's easier to look at bringing in a retired town manager. Retired
that?
manager,
well,
to
so.
do
okay,
something like
fine.
that. So, but yes, we can have plan A, plan B.
All right,
Okay.
everybody okay? Please. Any hand from Chelsea?
Nope, no hand.
So the submissions, you feel like are of a high enough quality that we're not getting a recruiter or.
Correct.
Because that's what we were gonna do if
We
you
have
told
not
us
met them
that.
in person yet, but on paper, yes.
Okay, good.
All right, that's encouraging. Okay, so the next item we may not have to do, so let's be clear. So there were two executive session minutes that we basically held from last meeting because,
Do you want me to get Lisa?
yes, sorry, let's do. Let me go to sheets back in here too, so she can hear this. Thank you, Vanessa. So now we're on the possibility of not even doing the executive session, because we don't get to do an executive session. Okay, so we held two because we thought that the changes that people wanted had to be done in executive session, but I don't think that's the case with at least the one that Chelsea was going to hold, and Chelsea agrees with that now. Andrew, I'm not sure what you were going to do. I thought you held the other.
Is there a date issue where the date didn't match up?
I think there was a date issue, but these dates, I think it makes sense to me now. So, but I had a sort of administrative one on October 26th, but I had a more substantive one on November 7th.
The October 26th one, I think I can say this in open session, just at the top, it says September 30th, 2022.
Sounds like it's a date issue.
Okay, so that's just the date issue.
So maybe the header wasn't.
Yeah, the header wasn't
Yeah.
changed. That's it.
But I had another issue with that. The list of attendees was not accurate.
Okay, we should be able to fix that.
I mean, it's up to you if you want to go in, if it's quick enough or if you.
Sam, did you need to go into executive for the 7th? You said they were more
I had some
substantial.
other things.
Okay, so let's, all right, so let's just go into executive session, okay? And, yeah, okay, so, the board is going to enter into executive session per MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21, and not return to open session to approve executive session minutes from October 26, 2002, and November 7th, 2022, which qualifies under exemption 7. Can I have a motion to do so?
So move.
Second, okay, all in, roll call vote, sorry. Andrew,
Aye.
Sam,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Cook is aye, Chelsea?
Aye.
Aye. Yeah, she's still there, 5-0 to go in,
And
okay.
we have one attendee.
Yeah.
Miss
Go ahead.
Lori.